Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks Blake. That was a great, intro song for what we're going to be doing tonight. So appreciate everybody making the trek out here in the weather. My name is Bruce Patton. I'm the curator here at Savoy. So again, welcome everybody. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about, hopefully you had a little bit of time to go out and look at the exhibitions we have. So we have the movie cars. We just put in the rad cars of Savoy. So hopefully you guys enjoy those 80s and 90s cars. We have Chip Foose's cars. So what's in Chip's garage out in the Great Hall. That's the next one that's going to be leaving here the beginning of June. So make sure you get to see those cars while they're here. And we have Women in Motorsports and, of course, our Savoy collection. So I won't go through all these, but check our website. You can kind of see what's coming up. You can see we're going to have the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. We're going to have 2 exhibits with those guys. We have Moonshine cars coming, and you can see the other ones that are coming up here soon. So again, please check those out. And then our next movie, American Graffiti. So I believe that's a Friday evening, and that'll be a great movie. If anybody's hopefully you guys have seen it before, but if you haven't, come and see it here. That'll be a fun car movie for everybody. And I would also like to thank Styles Auto Care for helping us put on these programs. It's their support that we're able to do these kind of programs, and really appreciate those guys supporting us here at the museum. So thank you for that. And now then, what I'd like to do is introduce Mike. So Mike, we met Mike at a NAMM conference up at the Henry Ford, and this was 2 years ago. And Mike was doing a program on these signs and what's real and what's fake. And so it was quite an interesting program, and we thought that'd be kind of fun to have here. And so Mike actually started his own museum, and I'll let him talk a little bit about that. But as he did that, he also got into this whole sign business. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Mike, let him kind of take over from here. And when Mike's done, what we'll do at the end is we'll turn up the lights a little bit, and I'll have a microphone, and we are recording this. So if you would, wait for us to give you the microphone so that we can actually get what your question is on the recording. We'd appreciate it. So.
There we go. Make sure everybody can hear me. All right, perfect. Okay, so the presentation today is going to be about signs. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's real, what's fake, how you can tell the difference so that if you're purchasing or want to go through your own collection, being able to navigate what's real, what's fake, and how you tell the difference. I'm going to do a little bit about why you should listen to me. So starting back in 2017, Hot Rod Power Tour, which a lot of people are familiar with, travels the country, thousands and thousands of cars go all over, and they had announced the route in 2018 to be running through North Carolina, which I didn't think much about. This is what my museum looked like in January of 2018, and Dad and I were at an auction out in Arizona, and my dad kept asking me, when are you going to get your museum open? When are you going to get your museum open? And I'm like, Dad, I kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I didn't really have a vision for doing a museum. I had sold a business, and this is what the warehouse looked like at the time. And I was like, well, I'll probably clear some stuff out. And I want to point out again, going back, this is December 7th of 2017. This is January 2018. Dad kept bugging me. When are you going to open the museum? When are you going to open the museum? Dad, what have you done? Well, I was talking to the Hot Rod Power Tour, and they come within 2 miles of your museum that doesn't exist because that's what the museum looks like. So while we're at this auction, I was like, well, I have cars. I know I can stage cars up, but I feel like they can be amplified if there's some signage and stuff around it. So in April of 2018, I've gone on a buying spree, and you can see signs all on the wall. This is a kind of a pulled back image. The building is about 12,000 square feet, and you see the crated signs that are there. I was buying anything and everything possible because the Power Tour that was announced in December of 2017 comes through June of 2018. So I have 5 to 6 months to assemble a museum that doesn't exist. So this is the other side, looking the other direction. I will say, when you come to a place like Savoy, this is one of the most incredible museums I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot. This building is not what I would suggest if you want to do a museum for a host of reasons, but it's what I had to work with. So fast forwarding, this is 2 years old. Since this picture was taken, I've added around 150 additional signs, some multiple neons, and the car layout's totally different. And as you can see, what started as I'm going to buy a few signs turned into a very unhealthy obsession. And so one of the first purchases I made was this sign, this Chrysler Plymouth sign. It was at an auction because, once again, Dad says, we got to have the museum open. And I'm like, well, I need signs. When I bought this sign, this was actually the description. Magnificent, large 1940s Chrysler Plymouth, single-sided neon porcelain sign, lights up brilliantly. I was super excited because I've got my first big neon. Well, the thing that I'll say is when you put a neon like that in a building that size, the wall eats it up and it disappears. So I hung it up and I'm like, man, I need a lot more stuff. So I kept buying more stuff. But as I was buying stuff, I did what most people do. I need to buy something. I don't know anything about it. I'm going to type into Google Chrysler neon sign. And I meet this guy named Jordan Richmond. I said, I'm trying to build this museum. I'm on this tight deadline. Do you have any signs? Sends me 6 signs. This is what I got. I said, boom, I'll take them. Let's go. So now he knows he's got somebody on the hook. I get lots of other signs. And he comes to deliver these signs after about 5 to 6 months after having started purchasing them. And he walks in and he sees this sign and he's like, what are you doing with that thing? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's the first sign I ever bought. Look at it. It's awesome. It's in great condition. He goes, it's fully restored. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It says magnificent, large 40s. It doesn't say anything about it being restored. I didn't have the knowledge base to know what I was buying. It looked cool. It lit up. I was the guy at the auction that, had a mission and was on a timeline. And so I just raised my hand a lot. So I called the auction house and said, you sold me a sign that was fully restored. And the reason why that's a problem, that sign technically could have been almost anything. And then it's repainted and neoned up. It could have been a hotel neon sign, which would be worth significantly less than a Chrysler Plymouth sign. So I didn't realize at the time, coming from the car world, restored is not necessarily a bad word. We're used to that word. I didn't think anything about the fact that it would be devalued because it was actually restored. And he goes, you don't know what that thing was. It could have been anything. So luckily, the auction house ended up actually refunding my money because they knew that they were in the wrong, because this is common practice to not disclose condition of signs. They won't go into a lot of detail, or they won't disclose that something is restored. Usually most people get it, they throw it up on the wall, and they don't find out till 20 years later when an auction house comes in and looks at it and goes, what are you doing with that restored sign? And they've got no clue. And so this is my business partner. This is the man who is one of the smartest people that I've ever met. And I love using this picture of it because he hates it. But he's been doing signs for a very, very long time. He's incredibly smart. And I told him, I'm like, well, is this common practice? Is this what happens when people go to auctions? I was used to it on the car side, but more like that's just not doing your due diligence of maybe going in there. But on the sign side, I was like, is this normal? He goes, yeah, people don't know anything. They sell stuff like this all the time. And I got really frustrated because when I was trying to do the museum, I was trying to hit a timeline. I was way too aggressive, which means I got taken advantage of. And that's on me. And I said, there's got to be a better way. So Jordan and I in 2021 started Richmond Auctions, Richmond being his last name. And I said, look, you have this knack for being able to find all this stuff. I think there's a void in the marketplace where we can actually describe stuff appropriately and people know what they're actually getting. And so that's kind of my origin story as to how I got into this. I was a collector first. I've been on the bad end of these things, and I don't want to see that happen to somebody else. And so why should you care? Well, one is you're spending your hard-earned money on this stuff, and it's unfortunate that you in good faith go and buy something and then find out that it ends up not being a real piece. And unfortunately, these days when I go into collections, people go, I bought this 30 years ago. That was in the 90s. People think when they say 30 years ago that it was in the 70s or 80s. It's not. It was in the 90s, which is when fakes were pretty much at their peak. And this is just to protect you sort of from yourself. And as you can see, signs have gotten crazy. This is a $1.5 million sign that sold in 2022. We actually sold this sign at our auction house. It was new old stock, had been in the family's attic for a long number of years, obviously, and was considered the best known example. And so I know it seems crazy that we're saying a sign sold for $1.5 million, but when a sign sells for $1.5 million, what do you think happens? Fakes come out. And so you can see here, you can go buy a reproduction of this sign. You can pick your size that you want. And as you can see, these are in the hundreds of dollars. And so why does it matter? Because if you're buying something that's hundreds of dollars, you obviously know that it's probably fake. Sometimes what happens, somebody thinks they buy a real one and they spend $12,500 on what's actually a fake sign. And this sign was sold after our sign was. And so what happens is people see these big prices that come out and then they think they get a deal because they're like, I got this thing so much cheaper than what this other one went for. And it's like, well, yeah, there's a reason why you got it for so much cheaper, because it's not actually a real sign. And what happens when you get into real versus fake, it can mean something else. It doesn't always mean just reproduction. This Sinclair sign never came as a neon. This is a sign that has had neon added to it. This sign sold for $70,000 at auction. That's the same sign for $3,400. And for $2,000 worth of neon work, you now have exactly the same sign. And so if this was a sign that you wanted to do for yourself, you can neon pretty much any sign you ever want to. And a sign like this, you're going to spend $2,000 to $3,000 to add that neon. So of course, what happens when you have a sign like this sell for that type of money, people want to take advantage of other people. And so they start going and, reproducing these, and they come out into the market heavy. And eventually the price drops down, because as you eliminate buyers, the price will continue to go down, and people are getting more knowledgeable on stuff. And so we're back to, why should I care? And it's because these signs have actually become valuable. I can't tell you the number of collectors where we go into their place. It's sometimes estate deals where somebody's passed and the collection's been left down. And we go in there and they're like, well, my grandparent, my dad, whoever, left these to us. He told us that they were worth this much money. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're actually end up being reproductions, which is an incredibly difficult conversation to have with people who spent money as if something were real, and then it actually ended up being a reproduction. And so towards the end of this conversation, I'll give you exact examples of things you can do to prevent from buying a reproduction sign that's actually being presented as an original. But it's important to describe, why are they so valuable? So this is from the end of 2022 to give you some examples of prices that are realized. As you can see, almost everything on here is approaching a 7-figure sign. I know that sounds insane. I understand that one of the first signs, if you look at our logo in the dead center with Richmond Auctions, if you look over to the left, you'll see the Smith-Aline Aviation sign that has the same airplane logo. That was the first sign that we ever acquired to do our first auction with. So it's kind of paying homage to what we had. And at the time, the world record for one of those signs was around $100,000 less than what we sold it for. Needless to say, that was the moment where I was like, hey, wait, we actually have a real business here. Granted, I never thought we would sell a neon fish for $115,000, but, I understand everything is sold no reserve. So 2 people were willing to pay that, because it takes somebody, to run somebody there. And so the question comes, why are they so valuable? 1, ease of purchase. More people sell signs because they're more valuable. They're easier to get their hands on. Logistics companies are specializing in moving these things, because if you look, this isn't a car. Most of these things are flat, they're heavy, they're awkward. The neons are obviously 3-dimensional. They got to be crated. And so the logistics can be challenging, but more people have gotten into it, which makes it a little bit easier. Knowledge of existing pieces, social media. You cannot take your sign collection to the cruise in. We understand the car world. We know how many of certain things were made, but in the sign world, we don't know. But as more collections come to market, more people share their collections on social media, you start to get an idea of what's out there. And it's always interesting, because when we go into a collection, somebody will go, oh, I got a piece I bet you've never seen before. because their working knowledge of the sign world is their buddies and them, whereas we're seeing collections almost weekly, and they'll show you something and it can be really cool, but I might have seen 3 of them in the past month, but to them, it's the only example that's out there. And as these things became more valuable, they started grading them. So there's grading services. Same as any high-end collectible that's ever existed. They end up eventually getting grading because it's a score sheet of who's got the best widget. So my biggest thing, though, and this is from personal experience, I used to laugh. My dad can tell you this. We used to laugh at people that were buying signs before the car auction because they were always the people that had to be there like 7 a.m. because you have to start at 8 o'clock, they run till 10, and then the real stuff starts. That's when the cars start. And I remember my dad and I having conversations about, can you believe somebody spent $20,000 on a sign? And I'm like, that's insane. I would never do that. Yeah, things have definitely changed. But what I realized is every car collector on planet Earth will buy cars fitted to their square footage. If you have 2,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet, or 200,000 square feet, if you're a car nut, you will simply adjust your budget to fit your square footage. And the problem is, whenever you've bought a car, if you own multiples, as soon as you bought one car, you're all excited, yeah, and then you're like, what's the next thing I'm gonna buy? I'm on Facebook Marketplace, I'm looking. So these signs allow people to get that same rush that they got from buying the cars, but there's no VIN tag, there's no property taxes, there's no DMV, they don't leak, they don't require maintenance. You get to get the same pleasure in the hunt without all of the problems that come associated with a car. So that's why this market continues to expand, is because honestly, we're all addicted to vehicles, and I'm just aiming them in a different direction. And once you get the hook in, you know, next thing you know, you end up having a room full of stuff. So the question about why signs are valuable, I got asked this recently at Amelia Island, and I don't know anything about foreign cars. I don't know anything about them. And a collector, car collector, I got introduced to him, and he goes, you're that guy that's got the sign auction company that sells signs for the value of cars. He goes, that's insane, that's stupid. I was like, hey, nice to meet you too, sir. and he goes, why are they worth so much? And right on my right, this is a Concours event, there was some foreign car, but I saw on the sign that was sitting over beside me, it said 1 of 10 that were known to exist. And so I told him, I pointed out like I knew what I was talking about. I said, you see this car? We agreed that there's 10 of these that are known to exist, right? He goes, absolutely. And I said, if we took all 10 of them that exist, because I'm making an assumption given the environment I was in that this is a high 6-figure or 7-figure car. I said, if I take all 10 of them and I throw them in that room over there, I said, we're going to judge which one's more valuable based on the quality of the restoration, right? And I said, if that's the best one, restored wise, then we agree that that's the most valuable. If we're going to assume that they're equal on options and engine and all that stuff. And he's following my logic train here. And he's like, yeah, that makes sense. I said, okay, now let's pretend it was never restored. And let's pretend that it was original. And pretend you actually couldn't restore any of the 10 cars that were there. And imagine that that car that's there actually looks like that, but it's original. And so you have the other 9, and they look more like this. And I said, so if I put all the rich people in the room and said, we're going to auction off this one, it's better than the other 9 that are here, how do I put a value on that car? I can't, because you cannot price the top end of any market. I don't care what it is. If it's a high-end collectible, and if it's agreed upon that something is one of the best examples, I said, you can't price it. These cars get restored all the time, and more likely than not, this is more what they look like. Now, this car featured here is actually my dad's original 1965 A990 factory lightweight race car. As you can see, it's very lightweight right now. We actually found it in a chicken coop, and they only made 14 of these cars, and I had the choice of either restoring this car or leaving it as is. In my opinion, if I actually restored this car, you'd have nothing but a firewall and the roof that would be the original car, and everything else would be parts gathered from other places. And so what I did is I went and made a clone car of it, but I was actually almost completed with this when I actually found the original. But my point is, if I had 2 of these cars there, and they were both original, and one looked like that, and one looked like that, obviously this one's going to sell for a lot more money. I said, so I sell a medium that can't be restored. Now, technically they can, but it's really obvious when it happens. I said, so imagine every vehicle you ever bought and every vehicle that was in your collection got reversed back to what it looked like originally. I said, what would your cars be worth? And he was like, well, I don't know because I don't know what they looked like. I said, that's my point. I said, everything I sell is original. Everything is guaranteed to be authentic. And I said, all of my stuff hung outside. So weather would destroy it and all that. So when you find high-end condition pieces, it means for some reason they either weren't hung, weren't put out, and those are very difficult to find. And in the sign world, there are thousands and thousands of signs that get auctioned off every year. We're going to auction off in the ballpark of 200 pieces that are going to meet this high threshold of like super high quality, and those are the ones that bring the big numbers. So that's my story as a non-biased person that sells signs for a professional living as to why they're worth, what they are. And you get people who want to do really crazy setups. And so if you have not been to the Hemi Hideout, this is absolutely one of my favorite places to go visit. It's down in Houston, Texas. John Hovis is the owner, absolutely one of the nicest guys on the planet. And he just he built this with the intention of having this type of layout. And as people have played with different ideas of how to display cars and do different museums, signs have become part of that decor. And so you have people that are decorating things out like this, and of course that drives the value. And that's all great, but we're talking about rare air of people that are buying that level of sign. And so bringing it back down to earth for the average person, it's like, I want to have cool stuff too. I don't necessarily need something that looks like this, but I would like to be able to have something in my garage or my man cave. And how do I do that and actually be on a reasonable budget? And so this is one of my walls in the museum. And I do lots of tricks to people when they come in because you don't actually realize what you're looking at for the most part. On a wall that's this congested, your eyes are going to immediately go to the Plymouth sign in the center, which in this wall is the most valuable piece. However, if I pull that Plymouth sign out, that entire wall costs less than $3,000. Now, we're not talking about the Dodge sign that's right there, the neon that's sticking out, but I'm talking every piece on that wall added up was a total of about $3,000. Most of that is paper that has been gator boarded. The banners that are there, these are pieces that are all in the hundreds of dollars. Even the two neons that are down at the bottom that say Dodge and Plymouth, those are called skeleton neons. They all go for under $1,000. You can get good stuff that looks good without actually breaking the bank. And this is the same scenario. I put a centerpiece in that's the neon. That neon today is about $7,000 to $8,000. And then everything else around it is in the hundreds of dollars with the exception of the big arrow pieces. Those were about $2,500. And then the two neons in the bottom left corner, those were once again about $700. But what's crazy is if you look in the bottom right corner, there's a neon that's actually not working. This little guy right here, that's more expensive than the whole wall. So that sign right there is actually made of copper. And it's the best known example. It's super early. They made these with Chrysler, Dodge, DeSoto, and Plymouth. And I've only been able to see one other one that's existed, and I unfortunately was outbid on that. But you can see how small it is relative to the rest of the wall. But you can decorate significant wall space and not have a lot of money in it. If you look at the three signs on the right, the Dodge Dependable, and the muffler sign, any one of those signs on their own are more expensive than the entire wall that's over on the left where the Dodge truck is and the posters are. So you can actually present a nice collection. Now, my place is excessive. Like, there's stuff everywhere. And anytime I never say no, so I just keep trying to figure out a place to stuff stuff. So it is a bit chaotic, but you can do things, they're extremely reasonable. Plastic, which is on the rise now, but this sign is Simca, which was a foreign brand that Chrysler owned about 10% of. That sign, $700 to $1,000, but it's tall. It's 4 foot by about 2.5 feet. All the signs around it, more expensive than the plastic piece that's there above it. This sign I bought less than a month ago. It's 6 feet long, it's 3 feet tall. It's way heavier than I ever expected a plastic piece to be. but I paid $2,000 for it. I had to get it out of Michigan to get it home, but this is inside of a building with a 20-foot ceiling. You put that inside of a normal garage, it's going to look huge. Of course, probably helps that you would have to have a Valiant, otherwise it might be a little strange. But there's a lot of plastic pieces. Plastic really started to come in 1960, so almost any vehicle made after 1960, you can generally find a plastic piece for. And like I said, they're actually not expensive. And this just gives you a quick guide, because regardless of brand, granted I'm Mopar heavy, everything is pre-1962. All the brands from late 40s into about the early 60s would make silk banners. They're commonly available. You can find them on eBay. They're going to sell for in that range of $150 to $500. Posters I buy all the time. They're going to fall in that range of $25 to $300. You get a place to use Gator board. That'll keep it from the humidity from warping it. You cannot use foam core or something like that. It'll end up looking like a boomerang without too much time. Skeleton neons, same thing, $150, $750, and plastic will, have a range in and of itself. So I don't want you to think that you have to spend a whole bunch of money to have a cool advertising collection. It's not required. And when you think about the value structure, this is what it's driven by. Porcelain is at the top by a long shot. You give me the same sign in tin versus porcelain, there can be a 5 to 10x difference in price. So porcelain is king, and then tin, wood, cardboard, and plastic are all kind of interchangeable, and then paper. But the question is how do you avoid making a mistake? So you want to buy something, you want to buy a couple of pieces, you go to the flea market, you go to a sign show, and you're ready to start buying. I am slightly biased in that our auction houses, I feel like, are best because we fully disclose everything about whether or not something is real. Richmond, we don't sell reproductions. Rockabilly, which is actually out of Hartwell, Georgia, just right down the road, we do have some collections where we'll have some reproduction pieces, and those are disclosed there. You can go to this great website, Live Auctioneers. Almost every auction house uses this as a platform, so you can search their old results to be able to actually see what signs are out there and what they're actually selling for. So obviously in this case, you can see the sign that we sold and then the much cheaper versions that are around there. And that's typically what they sell for, the $450 to $500 range, and that's totally fine. But as we saw, somebody spent over $12,000 buying one thinking that it was actually original when it wasn't. And descriptions can be a little crazy. It's either been completely restored or it's a reproduction, you decide. And that goes to my earlier point. I bought a sign that was restored, but it could have been a reproduction. It could have originally been a Chrysler Plymouth. I don't know. So anytime something has been restored, you want to be able to stay away from it. And generally, it's because it looks brand new. That's the first thing that throws it off. But you really need to be able to buy from a trusted source, because you don't want to end up finding out later that what you bought actually isn't real. And so how do you tell? Generally, when people use the word vintage to describe a sign, fake. So if you go into eBay, search signs, it says vintage sign, blah, blah, blah. They won't actually put a decade on it or a year. They just say vintage. So generally a no, you want to stay away from that. Bright orange rust. So this is a great example of a sign that has been accelerated to show rust. So this was a new sign that was intentionally chipped and then flash rusted. And as you can see, the rust has a almost bright orange color to it, whereas old rust looks more like this. So this is a sign that's roughly 100 years old that's in my place. And as you can see, the pieces that have lost porcelain are very dark in comparison to what you're seeing here. So when you see orange at all on a porcelain sign, more than likely that sign is actually more modern. And once again, somebody would buy that and go, well, I've had it for 30 years. That was the 90s. The sun was supposed to be made much farther back than that. And so that's a common occurrence. So you want to see that dull, almost gray color. And if you think back to my dad's car, that car isn't bright orange. It's rusted all to pieces, but it's more of a darker color than a bright color. When it comes to metal signs, tin signs, the top image is a real sign. So you can see the front of the fake will look almost identical in this case with this sign. They've gotten pretty good with the graphics. But on the back, you can see the original sign has proper metal on it and all of that, whereas the back of the remakes will have that snow white back to it. If you see that on a tin sign, 95% of the time, it's guaranteed to be a more modern sign. And there's nothing wrong with buying a modern sign as long as you're buying it at a modern price. But you don't want to be fooled into buying that sign on the top is going to sell for in the ballpark of $2,500 to $3,500. So I could see somebody selling the reproduction and saying it's $1,700. That's just the price point where you think the person knows it's valuable, but they don't know how valuable. Then you end up buying it and you flip it over. And that picture that's on the bottom, that's from my collection when I first started buying. So that's how I learned. This is an example that happened this week. So this was super appropriate for this talk. One of these signs is real. The other sign is not. This is a seldom seen sign. It's called a lighthouse sign. So they actually would be literally in the center of the street. It's four-sided. And back when they made these, making a hard 90-degree angle was not how they did it. It had almost like a rounded edge to it. But if you look at it, especially at a quick glance, if you look at that good on both sides, they actually look pretty similar. And generally, reproductions struggle with being able to get the font correct because they use modern font, which is not what they were using back in the day. But as you dig a little bit closer, now I know the color is off, and that's mostly because of bad imaging that was pulled. But I want you to look at the A in gasoline. The top sign is original. The bottom sign is not. And if you look at the A, it's got a little bit of a slant to it, whereas the A on the bottom is straight up and down. And if you go back and look, there's obviously weird font here. If you look at the T and that and the H, and they have weird lean to it, almost like italics. The T at the end of that looks a little different. They've matched that stuff up, but they missed the A on gasoline. The person that bought this sign, very knowledgeable. They were very proud to post it on Facebook. And then I had to message them and go, that's actually not a real sign. And he argued with me about it a little bit. And I was like, well, one, the first obvious sign is that they didn't make it in a 90 degree. It's got more of a round edge to it. But if you remember, you don't want to see orange. And we see orange all around here at the top. But the real obvious is the A that's there, that's got the heavy lean to it. So these are some of the things that you will see almost across the board where a font is wrong, it's got accelerated rust, or it's got that smooth back to it. Now, at the higher end, on higher dollar signs, one way you can always cheat to see if a sign has had something done to it, some restoration, you get a $10 black light and you shine it on it, and if it'll light up like Christmas if something's been done to it. The paint will light up. We use them all the time because it's not uncommon for us to walk into a place with a very large ceiling, sign's way up there, and I'm trying to figure out whether or not something's been done to it. And so, you go and shine the light up, and all of a sudden you see these little dots everywhere. And there's nothing wrong with the sign having touch-up. That's fine. We're talking about when somebody is actually misrepresenting a sign as real, when in reality, it's fake. And like I said, I can't stress enough, now that I've pointed this out, if any of you are into signs and going into flea markets, you will not be able to not see all of the accelerated rust now. Going back to that other image, you want to see like that dull gray color. Now, I could talk forever on this topic, but rather than make a bunch of assumptions about what you guys might have questions about, I would rather take questions instead of me just talking a whole lot about what it is that you might want to know about. So if you have any questions about signs, about value, yes, that is an AOL address. I was one of the first people on AOL in 1993. So when I was 14 years old, which was fun to explain to my parents while I was running up a $300 phone bill, because they charged you by the minute back then, but I was selling basketball cards in chat rooms. Yeah, that was fun to explain to my parents I wasn't doing something illegal back then. But I'm happy to take any questions both here and then afterwards. This is a vast topic, and I wasn't sure exactly, I didn't want to bore you guys and go super deep into something that actually isn't relevant to you. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. It looks like we got right here.
You mentioned the flash rusting, and I'm curious how they do that. And you also mentioned the black light and how it'll show you where there's been touch up, and I'm curious why it lights up with a black light.
I wish I knew the true scientific reason for why it does it. I just know it does it. So when a sign has been touched up, I don't know if it's something that's within modern paint, but porcelain that is fired in will not light up. Like I've gone through my museum and cut off all the lights and just walked through with a black light. So it's pitch dark. And I found a couple of pieces that I didn't know had been touched up. On 10, we had a 10 piece that came in that we thought was new old stock, and we didn't have our light with us when we physically purchased it. And when we got it, I was literally just messing around, and I hit it, and I was like, oh no. Somebody, when a lot of the 10 signs would come with like a wax paper on them, and when you would pull them off, sometimes it would pull the paint off, and people would go in, and whoever did it did an amazing job. But it like I can't stress enough, when you shine it on there, it's either totally dull, it doesn't reflect at all, or it's super bright. So you'll know for sure when you put it on there. And I'm assuming it's just the way paint is versus the fired method that they had used back then. And as far as how they flash rust it, believe it or not, most of them will just go and chip it on purpose and then put it in the ground. And then it doesn't take long, like less than a week. And it'll start to get super bright orange. And then it stays like that for a long time. I mean, it's not something that's going to turn dark in the next 5 or 10 years. It takes a while for it to get into that darker color when it's real. And so that's why anything that's orange, there's no way it's been like that for 50 years. It's just not possible. And once again, 50 years ago was in the 70s. Most of the signs that most people desire are going earlier in that. You don't really see a lot of porcelain stuff in the 70s. It's generally 60s and back, for the most part. So, but yeah, people, they'll do anything to flash rust it. But if you go on eBay, type in any brand, car brand, and sign, you'll see them just hundreds of them for sale. Most of them out of India, because India is where they still make porcelain signs. They're still made to this day. I get asked weekly from Indian vendors that ask me if I want to remake signs. And I tell them that I'm extremely interested. Can they send me what they can make? Because that'll show me what's being made, so I know what's actually coming over, because that means they've already produced it. And I mean, they've got them stacked up like cordwood. I mean, it's unbelievable. And they can make a reproduction 42-inch sign for $100 delivered to the US. And so there's a whole market. You'll see auction companies. There's one actually based in Georgia. All they do is sell reproductions, and they start the bid on every sign at $400 to $500. Because they're guaranteed to make money because they've bought them all from overseas. So when they come in, but they'll look pretty good, but they're not real.
They literally bury them in the ground.
Yeah, 100%.
I guess it rusts faster down there.
Yeah, they get the moisture in and out of there, and I don't think there's much faster ways to go and do it. But that's generally the way that they're going to do it. I've seen it done a couple of times. But like I said, if you look for that color, that's what will tip you off as to, okay, something's not right here. And unfortunately, the problem is you can't, unless you're in a job that has you seeing all of these signs, then the only thing you see is when you're either at a show or at an auction. You're not actually handling them very often. We have an auction in 2 weeks, and we'll sell 1,000 pieces. And we do that multiple times a year. And with Rockabilly added, we'll sell 10,000 signs a year. So the amount of pieces that we're actually physically touching and seeing is just huge, not counting the signs that we go into. We just got called the other week. Guy says he's got a great collection. Go into his garage, super nice neighborhood. I hate to guess what he spent. Everything in there was fake. There wasn't a single real piece. And that's a tough conversation, because then they just think you're trying to buy it cheap from them, and you're telling them, no, I'm telling you actually I won't sell it. And then it resonates that like, oh wait, this is real. My stuff's not real. It's like, yeah, it's tough. It's hard.
Got a question, completely different spectrum in the
Sure.
farming industry.
Mm-hmm.
What is the sign market like? Because, you had John Deere, Massey Harris, McCormick Deering, and stuff like that.
I hope I'm not going to give anybody a seizure here going through this real quick. So if you look into the the bottom corner there, you can see the John Deere we sold for $100,000. The Hood sign we sold for $125,000. It doesn't. The subject matter, I don't want to say is irrelevant, because it is relevant. But farming, gas, oil, automobile, to a lesser degree soda, if it's high condition or accepted as rare, that Caterpillar John Deere sign that's in the image is a neon sign in the original crate. And that was during a time when John Deere and Caterpillar almost became one company. And so there's only about 6 of them that exist. And that one was in the original crate. So for people who love, John Deere stuff and also Caterpillar, it was a highly desirable piece. One thing I did not know when we sold a farming collection in 2022, a lot of the John Deere stuff, and I was actually showing my dad this just recently, they're black, yellow, and red are the colors of the sign, and they have a deer in the center of them. There's a 4-legged deer, there's a 3-legged deer, there's a spotted deer, there's a spotted wood. There's like these nuances are really small, but to the hardcore John Deere collector, they mean something. To the automobile collector that wants to have a farming sign, he doesn't care whether it's a 3-legged deer or 4-legged deer or whatever. But all of the subject matters, if they're high condition, have seen a super elevation in premium. It's generally, I have found it more difficult to find high quality farming. We sold a collection in February that had, for farming, high level condition, and I mean, it was way beyond our expectation. So, but there's not nearly as much of it. And like I said, most of your porcelain stuff starts to disappear as you get into the later 60s, and then things are mostly tin or plastic or other mediums. So, you need those brands, that go farther back in order to really get into the porcelain stuff. And like I said, I can't stress enough, porcelain, stratospheric compared to any other medium. So, which is weird because, there's an era when they did smalts, which is like crushed glass. It's colored glass. It's awesome. So if this stuff gets anything on it, you touch it, it gets wet, whatever, you don't ruin it, but it messes the image of the sign up. So to me, it's really difficult to have a sign like that survive. And I was trying to think, I think there might be one that I have in the image where you can see part of it's where the orange rust is. Smalt signs are super cool. They're generally 20s and 30s. And so they're super early pieces, but they don't really have the value. Like that Dodge Plymouth is a smalt sign in that the lettering is made of that crushed glass. So if you get light on it, it reflects. So it's super cool. And I was looking for my International Dodge sign. Nope, I didn't take it wide enough. But I don't understand sometimes what drives the market. Paper doesn't survive, gets wet, it's ruined. Cardboard gets wet, it's ruined. But yet those things can be bought for hundreds, low $1,000 and get really graphic, really cool stuff. But oddly, the medium that is the most resilient, porcelain, which cleans well and all that, that's where all the value is. I don't understand it. So I just try to sell people I just get the best stuff I can and then throw it out there and, see what happens. You got a question up here? Oh, yes, sir.
Yes. So I was told that most of the repops are done with porcelain because of the chance of getting more money, number one.
Correct.
And also the clarity of the letters being a clean line from the background color, like, if it was blue background with white letters like this Dodge sign. So the clarity and cleanliness of the lines of the letter is also a clue. Is that true, do you find?
It can be. It's shocking how high the quality was back 100 years ago when they were doing some of these signs. And you generally see the sharpness with a modern font. So they're using a font type that is of a modern time, not back then. And it blows my mind that with all the technology we have in the world, it seems weird to say that the biggest barrier to people making a proper reproduction is that they use the wrong font. It seems like something that should be an easy solve, but I'm thankful that they haven't figured it out, because anytime I get the reproduction sent to me, as soon as you see it, it's really obvious that it is that modern font. And your best defense always is to go to that Live Auctioneer's website. It's a free website to use, and just type in the name of the sign. Like if you're looking for a Sinclair sign or something like that, just search for it, put the search order by highest price, because generally those are going to be the original signs. And then you can compare and contrast the font. And if you see a big disparity between what they're selling for and obviously what the sign is, that's obviously a clue. But sharpness isn't always an indicator, because if we go back and look right here at that Gulf sign, those are really similar if you look up close. I mean, if you take that A out and have it done right, I mean, I would have known because of the rounding of the edge, but the font is about as close as I've ever seen, for one of those. And what's goofy, this is not a popular sign. Like, I have no idea why somebody remade it as a fake, because this isn't a sign that's worth $10,000 or $15,000. So I don't really know what the incentive was to do it. And lighthouse signs, there's a few of them that are faked out there, but we're talking single digits. So it was really strange to me to see that as a reproduction, which is why the guy bought it. He thought there was no way that somebody would actually reproduce that sign. And I would agree with him from that point until we got into that A. But he, as somebody who's very sharp on this stuff, didn't think, because he thought nobody would make this as a reproduction, therefore I don't need to check. I check everything almost constantly, because I don't want to make a mistake like the mistakes that I have made, because I am the Mopar guy. Like, if you sell a Mopar sign, you probably talked to me at some point. And granted, it was early, but like I said, that bottom sign was mine. I made that same mistake, because they make that sign in 6 foot, which is what the top one is. That one below it is a 3-footer. I just assumed they made it. Well, they did, but somebody made it in the 90s and it wasn't Mopar.
So on that Gulf gasoline sign
Sure.
that you were showing, which one is the fake and which is the real one again?
The real one is the one on top in this image. That's the real one. The bottom one is the fake. So in this one here, the one with your white background is the reproduction, and the one with the wood background is the real one. And so now I know the blue and kind of the dark color look off, but I think that was more the photography of it than anything. And so in isolation, only looking at the Gulf sign with the white background, I can understand somebody making the mistake. But when I actually saw the sign in person, and so did not bid on it because of that, and then saw the post. And I didn't buy it because when we got close to it and realized the edges were wrong, I didn't need to look at the font at that point. And I too was surprised that it was.
If you look at the G, you know how it has the little shadow lines?
Yes.
You look at the inside of that G.
Right.
On the bottom of the middle part, there is no little lines, it doesn't look like. So that looks like another.
Yeah, that's why you have to be able to have a comp to go against it. There's literally 2 of these that have sold in the past 5 years. So like I said, it's not a popular sign, but it's why doing your due diligence to make sure, because they chipped it up. They were smart. They put chips all around it, into the top to make it look like it's aged, but you see how much orange rust there is around there. Now that sign was probably done, 15, 20 years ago, but it just hasn't had time to get into that darker, dull color. So between that and the 90-degree edge, and obviously the A, that made it pretty simple. So no.
Also, how much, in your opinion, so if you realize, okay, this is an original sign and there's touch-ups.
Yep.
How much does the touch-ups, and the guy was telling you, yeah, it's touched up, it's obvious, you can see it.
Sure.
How much does it really take away the value? And I'm not, sometimes you run into signs that are touched up because the guy just didn't know. And
Sure.
Of course, you'd rather have it not touched up.
Well, the great thing about touch-up is you can take it off, because porcelain is super resilient. And so you can literally strip it out if that's what you want. And the industry as a whole doesn't look down on touch-up, because it was just understood that people did that. And it's generally pretty obvious because it's not a direct color match. You can look at it and tell that it's there, so it's there. It's not like they're going, there's no touch-up here, and then putting their hand over the top of it or something. Like, if you don't see it, it's not there. So, but it's a grading system. So on the lower value signs, the signs that I'll say where a high condition one sells for $3,000 to $5,000, and let's say that that's like a 9.5. Then in our world, we don't ever call anything a 10. We've had very few 9.75s, and mostly 9.5s are our best pieces. So let's say you have an 8.5. The way we grade an 8.5, let's see if I can go back to here. So if you look on the fake sign here on the bottom, on the I in gasoline that has that chip, that would automatically make this sign an 8.9 is how we would grade that. Nothing can be a 9 that has a chip, what we call in the field. It can have it on the edge, but if it's in the center, it won't. That's going to start taking deductions of about 20% against a 9.5 minimum. Now, as the signs get way more valuable, that delta gets much, much, much larger. So if we go back to selling the sign for $1.5 million, we sold that 45 days before what had been previously known as the best known example was going to sell. And that one sold for over $1 million less than ours. And people are like, that's insane. Why would the people, we had 3 bidders past $1 million. Why didn't they bid on the other one? Because they don't buy second place. They lost the race to get first and they don't want second. And so when you're dealing with the best, so that delta between a sign that's a 9.5 and a 9.25, that's what that one rated. The other one was about an 8.5. The difference was $1 million. Now what's crazy is the delta between the second best one and about the third best one is another 200,000. This company, the quick story, this company went in business in 1929, went out of business in 1929. They never opened. The signs were made. They were out of Muskegon, Michigan. A plumber bought the building, took all of the signs and used them as septic tank covers. So even to this day, these signs, we actually had a customer call us, shockingly, right after we sold this. And he said, I have one of those signs, which of course what everybody says. I usually expect it to be one of the left or right there. And he goes, no, we were building my house and went and used a big claw, went in and heard a dink, and there were 2 signs underneath there. And we, you know what's weird? I'm going to be in your area tomorrow. So we flew up to Detroit, hauled over to Muskegon, and sure enough, on his wall was one of these signs. But when they were digging, they clawed it, and it actually bent the porcelain, which is actually, it's difficult to bend porcelain. So the problem is when you have curved porcelain, it explodes. So he had 1 or 2 little chips from the stress of the bend. And when you laid it on a table, it literally was bent like that. And I said, well, you got 2 choices. You either sell it right now, or in 5 years, you're not going to have a sign. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, you're going to hear dink, dink, dink over the next 5 years. And one day you're going to come down here and there's going to be nothing left of the sign because the porcelain will just pop and explode off the sign. And so unfortunately, he thought he had $1 million, but did not. And so, but that's why these are so valuable, is because one side of these is always destroyed because the gases from the septic tank come up, destroy one side. So there's a lot of them that are out there that have one really good side and one side that's destroyed. And so this one was new old stock. It had never been hung up, never on a septic tank. And that's why it went for so much money.
So basically, you're also saying that the top shelf signs, which is collector's grade,
Correct.
most guys can't afford that. But I feel like, because I do go to the Rockabilly auctions all
Yeah.
the time, I feel like the rougher signs, their values are going up because
Correct.
the top of the line signs are kind of bringing those
Correct.
prices up, because now somebody, you still want to buy a sign here or there,
100%.
but it seems like those are going up.
Yeah, they're always going to go up because the top goes up, and that pulls everything up with it. That will follow. Of course, the top as a percentage will likely go up more, or is dollar value more. The bottom one may go from a $3,000 to a $5,000 sign or something like that. If you're buying above an 8 condition sign, generally you're going to have equity as it goes on, because this market, I try to be honest about it. I think we're in its infancy, to be honest, because collectors realize now at these value levels, people buy them at the highest end collectors. They will buy these things, donate them into their nonprofit, take the tax break for it, and now they're essentially buying them, in their mind, for 50 cents on the dollar. So when they're spending money, they're thinking of it as a totally different calculus than most people. And that's why the numbers start to get really big at the highest end. But to your point, that's also going to pull up, the other pieces. And they're not making any more of this stuff.
So one last question. I know I'm hogging the microphone here. So I feel like license plate toppers or like repops all over the place.
Correct.
I don't know if your opinion is, I would like your opinion on license plate toppers.
Yeah, they're scary. The only thing I hate worse are PAM clocks. So because every PAM clock face has been remade for 30 years. And so they're like a Mr. Potato Head item. It's like it's got pieces from all over that's just slammed together. And that's why it's difficult for PAM clocks to have lots of value, because you never know if it's as it was originally. And with license plate toppers, you didn't see a ton of them. They kind of traded in their circles. And then all of a sudden now, because I've seen it with my stuff, I'm being offered these toppers that are all, 9.5 condition and higher. And I'm like, it's a license plate topper. It literally it's literally the front of the car. It's meant to be getting hit with stuff or on the back. Like, it's not going to be in perfect condition. And so when I see one where around the holes, there's no damage, there's no nothing, and it's literally perfect, I mean, I walk away from it. And the only way you can really test on some of them with the painted ones, you can do lead testing to see if the paint on it, has lead in it, because generally most of those would have had it. But yeah, the good thing is at this point, the toppers are still not at the high end spectrum of value. So if you do make a mistake, it's not kind of catastrophic, but it is super rare to find a mint original topper. And so I would say having just like a basic lead test kit would be probably the easiest way to test it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, sir. It's annoying. That's what it is. I just took in a collection of them, and it's driving me nuts because he had so much good stuff. So PAM clock is like a 12-inch, roughly diameter clock. If you just search clock on eBay or anything like that, it's the typical clock you're going to see. There's nothing really special about it. It's not neon or anything like that. But the problem is every PAM branded clock they made is interchangeable. So you literally can move all the pieces around, from the backing pieces, the motors, everything else. And they've made reproductions of those faces. So they'll take somebody will buy like a junky one that's $200 and then buy a reproduction face that if it were real, it's $2,000. And they'll go and smack it on that original can with an original motor that now has a fake face on it. And that's the problem, because you have to open the back of it and look. And most of those you can tell if you have a really good eye for it, but some of them are really good and they're difficult. So I would just prefer not to sell them at all if I have the choice. But the good thing is you can also buy them, relatively cheap. So a lot of the clocks you don't really run into that, but PAM clocks in particular, they're not ones I like. I hate them when I see them. Yes, sir.
Go ahead. All right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. How would you tell someone to research a sign?
The easiest way is that Live Auctioneers.
Live auction.
Liveauctioneers.com. They have the biggest online database that you can search. So you want to just type into the search engine whatever it is that, like, is there something in particular that, like a sign that you would be interested in, or?
I do have a sign. It's not an old sign.
Right.
It's one of the Winston guys.
Yeah.
Cigarettes.
Sure.
I'm curious about the car that's on there.
I gotcha.
I believe, and I was going to talk to you about this later, but I believe it's one of Richard Petty's Omni. Either
I gotcha.
024 or Omni.
Well, the great thing is, so like if you go in, so in that case, depending on, there's two things I would do. One is get a nice clean picture of the sign with your phone. And then you can go to Google and do what's called a reverse image search. So it will take that image, and if it can scour the internet and find that exact image, it will do that for you. Now, the success rate is a little low with that. It's always the first thing I do, because if that's the only thing in the image it picks up, it's going to search through everything that it can and try to find exact matches, and that's usually one way you can find something. The second way is to use Live Auctioneers. I would search just Winston sign, and then literally I always tend to put them as newest, because you can, like, most recently sold, because there's just been a lot more stuff sell recently, and you can just kind of go through and just by image be able to search it. And then the last one I would probably use, there's one called Proxy Bid. It's not as good. They're actually owned by the same company, but that would be another one that you could use. It's much more targeted than trying to use Google. Google at this point, trying to get anything relevant from a search is more and more difficult. And you can also, just like I said, you can email me a picture of it with whatever your question is, and I can dig into it too.
Thank you. I would like to see
Yeah.
it to you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Mike got one up here.
I'm going to get you, guys. That's to see you.
Porcelain's kept its price for a long time. How long do you think it'll be before the influx of quality porcelain will it affect the true porcelain here, like an Indian artifact, for one?
Right.
On a hunting trail, we had a lease in central Missouri. One of the guys found a 3/4 ground stone axe. Have a friend of mine, he's very knowledgeable, it's all he does. It's at the minimum 5,000 to 8,000 years old. It's never been touched. But for all the quality that people can replicate this, just like porcelain is turned over the next, how long do you think it'll be before it really starts to affect the value of a real piece?
I think it will be a while because we still have a secret weapon that we can use to be able to protect. We have, I hate to use the term gun, but that's really what it is. We can do a chemical analysis of anything that we have. So given the volume that we move through in signs, we have a pretty extensive database of what, now this is specific to us. This isn't like, community information, but we can, if we really have a question about something, and we have had that happen where we just don't know, we can do an analysis, and there are elements that were used back in those days that are not used in modern porcelain sign making. And so the reason all of the Indian contacts reach out to us is because we have bought a lot of those signs to build our database so that we know what they're doing, on a year-by-year basis, because we assume they're going to get better. They haven't wised up really to, and I don't even know that they could, nor do I think they care, because there's enough demand for them. They don't really have to worry about it. That's our final shield to defend ourselves with, is being able to do a chemical analysis. The biggest issue we've had with counterfeiting lately is with smaltz signs. Of all the people in the world, the Amish have become really good at making smaltz signs. And so luckily they tend to focus on farming. So we tend to know that's, when we see farming smaltz signs, we politely go the other direction when they're in really nice condition, because they've gotten so good at it. But luckily those haven't reached the big levels yet. But yeah, so the chemical analysis is our last hope of defense. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
With the lax regulations they have with the EPA, could they not use some of the older standards because they don't have to answer to the EPA here?
Well,
I know when it comes into the country, it's different, but
they would have to do the analysis to figure out what it is first. And so, just to give perspective, the equipment that we're using is $80,000 to do this properly. And we're very tight on, that information, obviously. It's always a possibility. The thing I will say is there's a lot more than one chemical. And even though back then there's a lot of variance, right? It's not like, well, they always use 17% of this. You still have kind of these groupings where when you have enough data points, you're going to be able to say, okay, this is of that time period, where over here, even if it's the same chemical makeup, the odds that the ratios are right is generally going to be really low. So that's the next level beyond that first level. Is like, okay, if they actually get the chemicals, then they would have to be able to actually match it. And it's not uniform. So meaning a Ford sign could have been made by one manufacturer, and then a Chrysler sign could have been done. So like Walker was a very popular porcelain manufacturer, but then you could have had another one. So which one are they going to copy? They're not going to copy both. We have the advantage of volume. We can just create a database that's big enough. And of course, as a business strategy, that's what I'm shooting for. It's like, well, we have all the secret information, so we can guarantee what we're selling is real. And not that we would show people that data, but we could show colored graphs and things to show this is what a real one looks like and this is what the fake one looks like.
just thinking for a long-term investment, how long would it be in the future before it would affect it? Thank you.
Yeah. What was the question? I'm sorry.
As a long-term investment, I was kind of getting your thought on how long it would be, just an estimate of when it would actually start to price it. You know, start to.
I actually don't
Start to
think
affect
that.
the price.
I see it as the opposite. The more people that touch signs, the more valuable the best pieces get, because the more people that get involved into any hobby and get awareness of it. I'm sure some of you had no clue that a sign sold for $1 million. And, you know, when you hear that, it's so staggering, and seeing these other numbers. So the more people that get into it, the more people that are buying stuff, the more awareness you get, the more potential buyers you get. And then people are going to learn the same lessons I did. Every collector I know has gone through the same path I have of, I wanted to buy stuff. I got some stuff that wasn't right. I learned, and even, I mean, I've still made mistakes to this day, you know, and so I'm not infallible by any means. So I think the more reproductions that get out there, the people who want to buy those, and I want to stress there's nothing wrong with that, but buy them for reproduction prices. That's the thing I want to get across. There's nothing wrong with owning a reproduction and paying $500. You just don't want to pay more than what you should for what it is. But yeah, my belief is that this has a long runway to go for the collectability, because there's 100,000 more card people than there are sign people. But as soon as you start converting card people over to sign people, you know, the world changes really quick, because they don't understand the difference in value. That's why some of the big auction houses that are more mainstream sell gas pumps that are $100,000 that I'll struggle to get $10,000 out of, because my consumer is educated and knows the market. They're reading, they're watching, they're following. The car guy's sitting there and he's coming to sit down for the start of the auction. It's like, man, that gas pump looks pretty cool. I just bought $1 million car. Yeah, I'll pay $100,000 for a gas pump. That happened on Monday. I was sitting there and I watched it happen. And so, yeah, it's a different buyer. So as those guys migrate over, you know, they'll get in a war with that. When they get bored with cars or they run out of room, they still got the itch.
We got time for one more. Gary, down front.
Yeah, so you've learned a lot in 7 years, haven't you?
Oh, I've learned a whole lot. Yes, absolutely. My business partner was more expensive than my ex-wife. So
The question I got is, do you have live in-person auctions, or is this all online?
we do them live. Our next auction is they are online as well, but we do them live in person, both at Hartwell, Georgia for Rockabilly and Greenville, South Carolina. So our next auction is May 31st and June 1st up in Greenville for Richmond auctions. And we display everything. All the signs are hung up, kind of like a showroom, so people can come in. We have I hate to say seating area, because when I'm sitting in this is a whole different level of experience here. But we do have a seating area. We do phone bids. People can bid online. But we've gotten to a point now that most of the people really trust us, because we're really hard on our signs. Like when we grade them, I want somebody to get it and go, man, this thing's a lot nicer than the way they described it. That's the effect I want, out of it, because I've been on the reverse side of getting something going. They said this thing was nice. This thing's, not nice at all. But it's fun to just go up, even if you're not a buyer, just to see the history. I love taking my dad through. I just took him through yesterday. He hadn't actually been in the auction house since we had set up an auction before. And walking through and hearing his point of view, living during a time when a lot of these brands were around, it was cool to hear his perspective, because I obviously didn't live during that time. But to me, my job is to find this history and make sure that I get it to the next person without screwing it up. None of this stuff gets in any better condition than what it is today. It only gets worse. So, trying to make sure that people, get this stuff. And I love hearing the stories about how people collected it and all that stuff. I had no clue that there were hundreds of gas companies. I was a car guy. So I had no idea that there were all these West Coast brands. And I've just learned so much to a history that I feel like if this type of stuff isn't done, it's just going to disappear. So I'm big on the stories and trying to find original photos and all that stuff. But that's way beyond what your question asked. But yeah, we do have it in person and online. And you're always welcome to come just check it out and always see what we're doing. Like I said, it's in Greenville, or the one in Hartwell will be in August. I took down a museum, and so we're selling everything from gas pump signs, video games, toys. Oh my God, it's thousands and thousands of pieces of stuff. So if you ever want a cool walk through history, it's pretty fun to go to.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you at the next program, I think is June 1st. So check the website. I think we have movie cars. Yep, behind the scenes. Have a good evening.